In his genealogy of Jesus, the son of David, the Messiah, the writer of the Gospel of Matthew does something special and unique, as we noticed in that last week. In the ancient world, the whole point of a genealogy was to trace your male ancestors. The reason why people did genealogies was to say who their male ancestors were. And this was because female ancestors simply did not count. This is because of the way they looked at the whole thing about how children were produced. See, in their minds, in their understanding of things, it was the man who planted the seed, and the woman was merely the soil in which the seed was planted. She contributed almost nothing to the whole process. I know that's crazy and insane from our point of view, but that's how they thought it. So in ancient genealogies, only men are named. But as we saw last week, Matthew breaks that rule in his genealogy of Jesus, and he names, in fact, 5 women ancestors of Jesus, including Mary, his mother. And I just assume that he didn't do that by accident, that if he named 4 and only 4 Old Testament women in the genealogy, he must have had some reason for doing so. And so I resolved this month to try and figure out what that was that Matthew saw in these women. We started last week looking at the story of the first woman named Tamar. Today we look at the second, Rahab. Now Rahab, like Tamar before her, is very much an unlikely hero. She is, first of all, a Canaanite, a member of the race that, according to the book of Joshua, is devoted by God to destruction. An evil race that needs to be wiped out. I'm not very comfortable with that, but we'll get back to that later. So she is a hated Canaanite. Second of all, she's not even a good Canaanite because she is a prostitute. She engages in a trade that was despised and looked down upon. So it really is kind of surprising that Matthew, in the opening pages of his gospel, would name this woman a Canaanite prostitute. It would especially take you by surprise if you did not know that Tamar, the woman he named before her, is also a Canaanite prostitute. There's a bit of a pattern. So, if Matthew named this woman, he must have had a reason. And I am assuming that he named her because he thought there was something about her story that could teach his readers something about Jesus and who he was and why Jesus came into the world. So Matthew brings up Rahab. So what was it? What was it about this woman? Now, one thing I would note, first of all, about Rahab is that she is a figure, unlike Tamar, who has excited the imagination of many people of faith down through the ages. In fact, Rahab is a very important character in Jewish tradition. In the Jewish mind, Rahab is, in fact, the very first convert, Gentile convert to the Jewish faith. And according to the stories and legends about Rahab that are told by Jewish rabbis, it says that she went on not only to convert and become a Jew, but also to marry none other than Joshua, the leader of the invasion of the land of Canaan. And not only did Rahab and Joshua marry, but they also had children. And again, according to Jewish tradition, those children became the forebearers of important figures in the history of the people of Israel, prophets in particular. And so it was said by the rabbis that people like Jeremiah and Baruch and Huldah were all descendants of Joshua and Rahab. In many ways, I think you might say that Rahab became for the Jews from early times, a symbol of all the good that could come into the Jewish faith and nation by means of Gentiles. And that's why she was celebrated so much. Now, I do not know how much Matthew was aware of these traditions, these Jewish traditions about Rahab, but if he was aware of them, it seems he did not agree with at least some of them. Because, of course, according to Matthew, Rahab did not marry Joshua. According to Matthew, in his genealogy, she instead married this guy named Salmon. So, for whatever reason, Matthew doesn't agree with all of this tradition, and yet at the same time, I'm quite sure that one of the reasons why Matthew names Rahab is for that same reason. Because she is a wonderful symbol of the Gentile convert. He names her as a way to remind himself and his readers that yes, Jesus came to save the people of his own nation, but that he also came to save the people of all nations. So Rahab serves as a reminder of that. But I suspect that's not the only reason why Matthew names her. I think there's more going on. And so let's delve a little deeper into Rahab and her story. What we know about her, as I said, is first of all that she's a Canaanite and that she is a prostitute. And that prostitution definitely was a career path that was looked down upon and despised by others, as it often has throughout history. But if she was a prostitute, it's also kind of curious, but because it does seem, if you read the story carefully, that there was something else going on in her household. Did you notice that? Up on Rahab's roof, there were stacks of flax just lying around. Where did that flax come from? Why was it there? Also, she seems to be able to very quickly and easily put her hands on the rope. She also has a strand of rope that would have been very valuable and expensive because it was dyed a crimson color. All of this just sort of suggests to me that maybe Rahab or someone else in her family had another job, weaving strands of flax into rope. A common occupation in the ancient world. Now, I don't think that necessarily matters. I just find it kind of interesting and intriguing. Maybe she was also a rope maker. Anyways, she had a trade, she had an income, but Rahab, nevertheless, finds herself living in about the worst neighborhood in the whole city. Because we're told that Rahab and her family live in a house that is built right into the defensive walls of the city. This is not good housing. And you've got to assume that all of the poor and despised and outsiders of the city were the people who were consigned to live in the walls. I mean, think about it. In the event of an attack, who was going to die first? The people living in the walls. So the leaders of the city apparently decided that all of these expendable people should live in the walls. This is a class of people obviously despised and looked down on by the people in the city. Now, I'm sure the leaders of Jericho had what they thought were good reasons to order their city in this way. But you realize what effectively they were doing? They were entrusting the defense of their city to the people who had the least stake in that city, to the people who benefited least from the systems in that city. And that backfires on them, doesn't it? Because Rahab, it turns out, feels very little allegiance for this city that despises her and looks down upon her. She doesn't feel as if she owes the city anything. And so when the opportunity arises, she's ready to abandon her city and throw in her lot with the invading Israelites. And maybe her unfaithfulness to her city wouldn't matter, except for the fact that she is literally manning the defenses of the city. She's the opportunity to let the spies escape. So, people of Jericho entrusted their defense in people who did not benefit from the social systems of Jericho, and it let them down. And how many societies down through the ages have done exactly that? Have entrusted their defenses in people who did not benefit from their systems. I mean, it's often said that that's why the Roman Empire fell, because they entrusted their defenses in barbarians who had no stake in the empire. Just something for us to think about as we order our society and as we decide how to treat those people who defend our society. So anyways, there's Rahab, Canaanite prostitute who has little stake in the city, despised by the city. Is that enough reason for her to do what she does? To abandon her city and throw in her lot with the invaders? Is there anything else going on? What other possible motivation could she have for what she does? Well, I think that Matthew, in his genealogy, holds out one other possible explanation for what she might do. As I said, Matthew doesn't agree with Jewish tradition that states that Rahab went on to marry Joshua. According to Matthew, she married another guy, a guy named Salmon. Who was Salmon? Who, in Matthew's mind, is Salmon? Well, just think about the story again for a minute. According to the story, in the book of Joshua decided to send 2 spies to spy out the land and to go into the city of Jericho. Now, Joshua did not tell them where to go in the city. He did not tell them exactly what to do in the city. They were simply to go and get some information. But they chose to go to Rahab. They chose to go to the house of the local prostitute. Why? Possibly because they figured that the local prostitute might have good contacts, maybe with the leadership of the city. Maybe she would be a good source of information. That's one possible reason. But I can't be the only one to think, well, is there another possibility here? These are 2 soldiers. 2 soldiers who, for the first time in a long time, have been released from military discipline. After marching around in the desert for like 40 years, for the first time in their lives, they get to go to the big city. Just wonder, could there be another reason why they might choose to go to the local prostitute? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Man or man, it always happens. What if what Matthew is saying is that one of these 2 spies was a guy named Solomon? And what if he met Rahab? And he fell for her, and she fell for him, and somewhere down the road they got married, they had a child. Is that what Matthew said? Kind of interesting, because it would make the whole thing a bit of a love story. I mean, think of it. What a story. A man trying to pull off a hostile takeover meets a hooker with a hard goal. They fall in love, and everything changes. I think if we set this up, we could make a blockbuster movie. Make millions of movies. Pretty woman, walking down the street. Pretty woman, the kind I like to meet. Pretty woman. All I'm trying to say is, maybe what Matthew suggested is that Rahab did it for love. And I don't know about you, but the romantic in me says, you know what? I kind of like that idea. Because it is a love story. And the story of Jesus is a love story. The greatest love story ever told. So maybe that's it. Maybe she did it for love of this guy named Solomon. But there's another motivation to consider here. Now, if you read the story in Joshua, and we didn't read the second part of the story, when the city's actually invaded and destroyed and what happens then. But when the story of the invasion is told, one thing is stressed over and over again. It says that when they invaded the city and attacked it, Rahab was saved, but not just Rahab. Also, the people of her family, and this is the phrase that is used several times, all the people who belonged to her, they also were spared. And so when the story is told of the final invasion, the stress is put on the fact that not only was Rahab spared, but that all the people who belonged to her were spared. So the emphasis is not on how Rahab saved herself, but on how she saved others. Now, I think that's also very important. One thing you need to understand, of course, is that Joshua and the spies and the Israelites in this story are actually behaving in an absolutely terrible way. I mean, they are invading this land. It is not a war of defense. It is a war of aggression. It is a war of conquest, and they are the aggressors. They, unprovoked, are invading this land. And what's worse, not only they are aggressors in an aggressive war, they are basically carrying out what would be called in modern times genocide. Because when they finally attack and defeat the city of Jericho, they do not take any prisoners. They do not even capture anyone as slaves. We are told in the book of Joshua that they killed everyone. Men, women, and children. And not only the human beings, they also put the oxen, sheep, and donkeys to the sword. Everyone was slaughtered. This is genocide. No other way to put it. And I realize that these were other times and that people in those times did prosecute wars in different ways. And I do understand that according to the book of Joshua, they did this because it was what God wanted. God had told them that they had to destroy all of the Canaanites. But you want to know what? I don't accept that. I don't agree. Because the God I know, the God that I've come to know, who has been revealed to us through Jesus Christ, is a God who knows how to forgive enemies, and who does not hate those who hate him. That's the God Jesus revealed to us. Such a God would never use genocide as a tool, even to accomplish the most noble of goals. So, you know what? They may have thought it was God's will. They may have thought they understood what God wanted. They were wrong. They did not understand God as completely as they needed to. I don't know. But anyways, what they were doing was horrible. And whoever understood correctly what the will of God was in that situation, you need to understand the impossible situation that Rahab found herself in. Because she had every reason to believe that these Israelites were about to unleash untold terror on her people. And in the face of that great evil, what did Rahab do? She acted as she could to save as many as she could. In the face of great evil, she acted to save who she could. Isn't that the story of Jesus? Jesus, in the face of great evil, I mean, though innocent, accused, and condemned, and murdered by the authorities of his day, great evil. And yes, the Romans may have thought that they were doing the right thing. They may have thought that they were doing what they had to do to reestablish order. But they were wrong. And it was evil. And Jesus, in the face of that evil, acted in such a way, without fighting back, without even condemning his enemies, acted to bring about salvation for the greatest number possible. I think maybe that's one reason why Matthew goes out of his way to name Rahab in his genealogy of Jesus. Because he sees Rahab as a model for what Jesus will be. It is Matthew's way of saying that anyone who does that, anyone who puts their life on the line for the sake of the salvation of others, can and does teach us about who Jesus is and what he came to do for us.